Okay, well, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura Hurd, and thank you for joining the Groundwork Monitor Elasticsearch Integration webinar. Wow, that's a lot of words. As a way of introduction, I manage sales here at Groundwork, and we're super excited to present this to you. For the last year or so, the Groundwork engineering team has modernized the look and feel of Groundwork, which we are now calling Groundwork 8. They've added some enterprise features to a variety of open source tools. For example, Elasticsearch, which is today's topic. So with that said, let me introduce today's presenter, Thomas Stocking, our VP of Product Strategy.
Hello, everyone. And again, thanks for coming. I thought today we would go through about a 20 or 25-minute presentation with hopefully some room for Q&A at the end. For those of you who are not familiar with Groundwork Monitor Enterprise, I'll talk a little bit about that. Oh, and by the way, this will be recorded and will be posted later. So if you miss something, if I go too fast, you have the opportunity to either ask a question or to review it later. That being said, I'll try to go slowly. We'll also talk a little bit about Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, which make up the Elastic Stack and are excellent open source tools for real world use cases in monitoring. And we'll talk a little bit about a couple of those, hear from some people who have actually implemented them. And then we'll talk about how we bring it all together with Groundwork, Groundwork Unified Monitoring with the Elastic Connector. As you probably know, because you're on this webinar, Groundwork's reason for being is to take the best open source monitoring tools and make them easier to use and to support the integrations with them. So that's why we're here. We do that with our own software, our own secret sauce, our proprietary software, but also make the best possible use of open source tools. We're then going to look at how we suggest you deploy the Groundwork and Elastic Stack with the connector, the different scenarios there. I'll go into a bit of a live demo, show you how it works. I won't spend too much time on that because it's not really that much to it. It's pretty simple to configure, but you'll see that. And then we'll go on and talk about how you might take the next step in taking a look at this. If you have any questions, there should be a Q&A button on your screen, which you can ask those questions and I'll get to them. If I don't get to them in the session, I will follow up with you in email. So feel free to send those questions in. Okay, let's go on to a little bit about Groundwork Monitor Enterprise. For those of you who are already familiar with this, apologies for going over the same material, but I think that it's always good to remind people what we do. We're an on-prem monitoring platform. We built the platform with both open source components and proprietary software, our own stuff. And the platform is really a way of collecting monitoring data from all different aspects of your infrastructure, whether it's your cloud, your data center, your hybrid cloud, private cloud, your network devices. All of those data sources come together in Groundwork in a common data model, which is easy to see, easy to visualize and understand, and tracks really the availability and performance of all of your infrastructure. So that's really what we do. We bring it all together, give you a bundle of software. In Groundwork 8, that's a Dockerized bundle. So it all runs under Docker Compose. It's easy to deploy to a Linux server, either in your data center or as an AWS VM or as a VMware VM. All of these various deployment options are really yours to choose from. And it's a very flexible solution, which can do quite a bit of different kinds of monitoring with the different types of open source software we have. So a little bit about Elastic. Elastic is also an open source Apache project. They have a commercial company behind them, but the basic release is open source under the Apache license. And what it is a log management or message management aggregation database. So you can kind of think of it, if you're familiar with Splunk, the commercial software Splunk, it's sort of an open source alternative to that. The commercial companies compete. But on the open source side, Elasticsearch, and in particular when you combine it with a couple of other projects called Logstash and Kibana, is a very effective way of monitoring log messages. And in fact, any data that comes in a sort of time-stamped series of messages, like say email or SNMP traps. These are all examples of things you can monitor with Elasticsearch, and store in Elasticsearch, send it into Elasticsearch with the Logstash aggregator and filtering mechanisms, and then search through it with the Kibana search engine. So those three things together really work well. We actually bundle the open source version into Groundwork Monitor just to sort of monitor our own logs. We found it so useful that we decided, well, we've got containers here. Let's add an Elasticsearch container, a Logstash container, and a Kibana container, and send in some data. So you can do the same with your own cluster, Elasticsearch cluster, or you can use, for very light duty, you can actually add some of your production monitoring to the Groundwork one. We don't actually recommend that you do very much with it because it's already being used for the Groundwork logs, and we don't want you to kind of pollute that. But I am going to use it as an example in our demo today, so you'll see how that works. And now I'd like to talk about some real world use cases. And actually, I'm going to let my colleague Joey Byers talk about that because he's actually implemented some of these things. Joey?
Thank you. Yeah, a couple real world use cases we've implemented. The first one I want to highlight is security. Modern attacks no longer brute force authentication attempts against a single device multiple times. Instead, those brute force attempts are going across your infrastructure, one authentication attempt, one device at a time. You can ship all those logs to Elasticsearch, configure a threshold for how many password failures you want to detect across the entire infrastructure, and be alerted when, say 5 attempts across the entire infrastructure happen, so that you can react a whole lot faster to those type of security incidents. Another use case is email messages. Some applications and some hardware devices are only capable of sending email alerts. You can also ship those to Groundwork and get those alerts from a single source, and also view those alerts in a single pane of glass. So those are the two best examples that are real world and have been implemented.
Thanks, Joey. Always nice to hear from the field. I don't get out in the field as much as I'd like to, and it's great to see people actually using these solutions to do real world monitoring. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about what the Elastic connector with the Transit Connection Generator, or TCG, actually is, and what it does and how it works. Well, it is a Go program, so it is a single executable that runs on Linux, and what it does is connect Groundwork to the Elastic stack. Okay, so it's that little bit in the middle there, that little plug in the middle there between groundwork here on the left and Elastic on the right. And the way it works is it effectively scrapes the Elastic API and looks for any saved filters that are already defined in Kibana, and it pulls those back into Groundwork as standard services, okay? So that means that they get mapped into the Groundwork data model and look exactly like what you might do on, say, disk space or CPU utilization or network connectivity on a network device. The results of the saved search, that is the number of hits, become a metric and look exactly like the services in Groundwork. So how would you deploy this? And this is when I'm talking about the deployment strategies and how you might set this up. If you have your Groundwork Monitor enterprise server here and your Elastic Stack, which is typically deployed in a cluster. By the way, you can deploy that in AWS. You can deploy that in multiple different ways. There's lots of ways to deploy Elastic, but typically it's in a cluster with a few nodes. And then the log messages are coming into those nodes, coming into that cluster and getting stored and persisted there. Well, you could deploy the Groundwork Elastic connector on a separate system in between those two, right? You could just fire up a Linux VM or a container and run that Go program in there. It typically runs as a Linux service under systemd. So it's pretty straightforward to do that. Either way you go. You could also, alternatively, you could deploy it on one of the cluster nodes if you wanted, although we don't really recommend that. And what we've done in our demo is just to deploy it locally on the Groundwork Monitor enterprise server because we have a demo server and we know how much capacity it has, so it's fine to do that there. And in fact, we've documented that example so that you can try it that way too. If you don't have an Elastic Stack cluster already, you can just connect to the one that's in Groundwork Monitor Enterprise. Okay, so you can see the point of this slide is really that it's very flexible and it's just a Go program. All you really need is connectivity to the appropriate ports with the appropriate authentication, and you can deploy it anywhere in your infrastructure you need to. So let's jump into a live demo. I think I can show you one of these use cases here. I'll just go to, here's the sort of the flow of the demo. I'll go to the log analysis dashboard, which is really the Kibana interface. And then I'll go to how we configure the connector to connect Kibana to Groundwork. And then I'll show you the results in status summary, okay? So pretty straightforward. I'll just zap over here to the Kibana interface inside of Groundwork. So that's under dashboards, log analysis. And you can see here, I've got a filter already loaded. You can actually import and export filters. It's pretty flexible, but I've got a filter. I'm looking for an account failed to log in for administrator. And guess what? I don't have any results. Even though I know that there are some results out there, they're just not in the last 5 days. So I'm going to go and expand this to, say, 15 days. And there I go. Okay. I've now got 5 hits. In fact, and the account administrator failed to log on 5 times on July 13th. Well, that's interesting. I want to know if that happens, and I want to see the results in Groundwork. So in order to, now that I've got my filter set up the way I want to find the things that I'm interested in, I can just save it. And when I save it here, you'll see that I have the option to save the time filter. I'm going to change the description there so it's more descriptive. I can save the time filter with the time filter with the primary filter. So again, I'm just looking through the messages that are coming in. I'm feeding in Windows log messages. I'm finding the failed logins in the data stream, and I am saving the filter, which finds what I care about. Now, I might set this in practice to 1 day or 2 days to make sure that I catch, sort of longer running attacks. 15 days probably isn't something that you'd normally set. I'm just using that as an example. But if I save that now I've got it saved as failed logins administrator. Okay. So that's great. And I can pull that up anytime I want to take a look at it. But what about integrating it into the rest of Groundwork? Well, I come over here to the next screen, which is available configuration connectors. And you can see here I've already set up the Elastic connector to talk to the local Elastic, local host. And if I go over here to the metric screen, you can see I've already added the failed logins administrator. If I go here, you can see I can set my format string. It's just a number of hits, so it's not very interesting to format it differently, but I could if I wanted. I could set my own display name. I don't have to use the query name. I can call it something else. And that's sometimes useful if you are wanting to communicate with the humans who are actually going to be looking at the displays. What are they looking at? I can set a warning threshold and a critical threshold, and you can see if I've got 5 matches, I should be coming into a warning, right? And I shouldn't be in a critical because I don't have 12 matches. And there's also a description here so that, again, you can communicate to your colleagues about what this is and how it's being used. So all I really have to do is save that. The connector is green, which means that it's running. So it's actually feeding messages right now. So let's go over and take a look at what that looks like in the status summary. And lo and behold, I have a warning message. And you can see here, this is ticking up. As soon as I saved that connector, it started ticking up. In fact, the last value is going to be 5 here. I can just sort of scrape over that and see that it's ticking up and going into warning. There it is. So there you go, real-time demo. The Elastic connector, finding the conditions that you wanted in the logs and setting an alert. Okay, I think I'll just drop back into the slides for a minute here. So why did we do this? Why did we make this this connector? Well, what we saw was that when we had the older Groundwork 7, we had an event console, which is, message oriented. It's sort of another way of doing monitoring is message oriented monitoring, and console messages are a way of doing monitoring. People who are familiar with maybe Tivoli or Micromuse are familiar with that. And there's lots of filtering and correlation and that sort of thing that you can do with those systems, and that you could do with the older Groundwork event console. But we found that there was a better way. That Elastic was actually way ahead of us, especially when you combined it with Logstash and Kibana, and it was open source. So once again, Groundwork is going to bring you the best open source software and make it easily integrated and support it. And that's what we decided to do. Instead of, burden our engineers and therefore our customers with the price of our engineers to build a competing event console, we would simply use open source and make it supported and integrate it. And so that's what we've done. And that gives you all these benefits, right? You can enhance your security of your systems. You can enhance the visibility across all your logs, all your application logs you can feed into this system. You can really see what's going on. And ultimately what you get is a reduced cost. Better cause determination will reduce your remediation costs, lower your costs of operating your systems overall. So that's really why we did it, to address that use case. And as you can see, there are real world use cases you can use right away. So let's see, I've burned up a fair amount of my time here. Let's see if there's any questions in the chats here. I'm not seeing. Oh, here's a question: Is the Elastic connector included with Groundwork? And yes, it is. It's actually, there's a link for it right here. You can get it on the Groundwork. Well, actually, that's not the link. Let me show you the link. I'm going to go over to the Groundwork Monitor support portal, support8.guas.com, and I'll just show you that there's a full example of how to configure it, as I've just done here. But there's also a download page, and you can get you can immediately go to getting your the Groundwork and the Elastic connector, and also other pieces of Groundwork Monitor that are released for free to use right here. Let's see, here's another question. Oh, is the Elastic connector open source? Well, it's based on the Transit Connection Generator, which is a Go engine. It hasn't been released as open source, as an open source project yet, but that is pending. That is part of our product plan to release it as open source. So we just really want to make sure that we do that release properly. We're very conscious of the open source community's acceptance of new software, and we want to make sure that when we release it as open source, that it's something we can be proud of. We are quite proud of what we've done with it, but we want to make sure we have all of the appropriate attributions and headers, and give everybody who worked on it credit. So that's part of our product plan, and we will release it open source. It is free to use, however, at this moment. So, okay, I think that's all the questions that I can see right. Oh wait, there's another question coming in. Let's see. And yes, there's a question here: is the Elasticsearch portion can either be used open source by the end user, or they can have a contract with Elasticsearch, right? Yes, that is true. You can use this with the commercial Elasticsearch or with the open source Elasticsearch. It depends on what your preference is, really. If you need the commercial support from Elastic, let's say you have a compliance requirement or something like that, where everything has to have a support contract, then absolutely you can deploy the commercial version of Elasticsearch, and you can definitely connect with the Groundwork Elastic connector to it. It will work just fine. Alternatively, if you're cost conscious and you don't have such a draconian compliance requirement, you can deploy the Elastic cluster as an Apache project, and there are distributions of it. Amazon actually has one that you can download and install. In fact, that's pretty much what we're doing. And in fact, AWS has a way of deploying Elastic in AWS. I don't think Elastic the company is too happy about that, but that's what's happening. It's great software. They did a really good job. And I think that, if I was the author of Elastic, I'd be proud that people are making such great use of it in open source. So that's what's happening, and you have your choice, right? Let's see, running out of time here, but okay, if you guys have any additional questions, you can always contact us here. In fact, Laura has given you her email address here, lhurd@gwos.com. I'm tstalking@gwos.com if you guys want to contact me directly. but we are really proud of the job we've done here connecting Elastic, Logstash, and Kibana to Groundwork, making the best use of that open source software for integrating and getting unified monitoring going with the log messages that people are aggregating in their Elastic clusters. So that's what we had to present to you today, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Thomas. That was great. Really appreciate it. And I just also want to remind everybody that you can download a version of Groundwork 8.1 from the Groundwork website and set it up in a test environment. I think you can monitor up to 200 devices with that at no cost for a few months. And lastly, we are contributing to our blog on a regular basis, so please check that out as well on the Groundwork website. So thanks everybody for joining. We'll be in touch via email, and wishing you all a very pleasant day. Thank you. Bye for now.